Hi, it's Colin Coward. I started The Volume to bring you some of the most authentic voices in sports. While you're here, make sure you hit subscribe. Thanks.
Really interesting and entertaining game tonight in Memphis. I was very disappointed that Ja Morant didn't play, but there's this interesting phenomenon that happens in the NBA, and I think you saw it a little bit in that Minnesota Timberwolves Suns game in the early stretches of the game when Minnesota was in control. When you have really young teams that have a lot of athleticism and size, that are at home and that are motivated for whatever reason, they can be like a buzzsaw that you're running into. You see this a lot in the NBA playoffs. Better team at home goes up 2-0. They're the better team. They're usually the older team. They're the higher seed. They have the veterans. Then they go on the road. It's like the Cavs when they go on the road, or when they go on the road to Indy, or the Miami Heat with LeBron when they go on the road to Indy and play Game 3 when they're up 2-0. That raucous environment, super motivated team, young, athletic, feeding on the energy of the crowd. It is literally a buzzsaw. And I remember seeing once upon a time a stat from Vegas. Somebody was looking at Vegas results of this kind of thing. Underdogs Game 3 down 2-0 at home. I think they win, they cover the spread like 60% of the time. There's data that backs this kind of thing up. Don't quote me on that specific number, but there is data that backs that kind of thing up. I think that's what happened to the Brooklyn Nets tonight. You have Ja Morant out. You had all you have to do is look at the Memphis Grizzlies fans and the way they were acting on Twitter all day. They were so excited for this game. The arena was electric. Like we talked about in the show on Monday night, when you sub Ja Morant out, who is not a good defensive player, even though he's very important to that team, he's not a good defensive player. You put another athlete on the floor. Obviously, when Tyus Jones was out there, it's not great either. But when Tyus Jones was off the floor and they're playing, they're basically letting Dylan Brooks run the point. They are super, super athletic now. That even further makes that concept that I'm talking about more complicated. And you saw basically the Nets run into the buzzsaw, fall way behind. They gave up 1 million points in I think they had 22 fast break points that they gave up in the first half and 11 offensive rebounds. Those are two stats that are irrevocably attached to effort and athleticism. If you are a bigger, stronger, faster team that's playing harder, you're going to get a shit ton of offensive rebounds and you're going to run up and down the floor and get dunks. And that's what they did in that first half. Then the Nets settled down in the second half and got to what they were doing. Through the entire game, KD and Kyrie were getting whatever shot they wanted, even without Seth Curry as a spacing threat, even playing a lot of minutes of Andre Drummond and Bruce Brown in the front court, which we're going to get to in a minute. But they were just getting whatever they wanted. So I knew as soon as they kind of tightened up some of those details, as soon as they started getting back in transition, as soon as they started boxing out, they'd go on a run. And they did. And the Nets actually, I think they went up 104, 101. They kind of had control there for a minute. And then that buzzsaw came back. And their defense locked in. They got a bunch of stops, and Desmond Bane made a bunch of threes. DeAnthony Melton made one. They made a bunch of threes in that fourth quarter run, and it was just too much for the Nets. I don't read too much into that. I'm still a huge believer in what they do for a couple of specific reasons. So I wanted to dive in. First of all, we got the word today that basically for the rest of the season, Kyrie Irving is going to play in every home game. So I told you guys that while I was worried about that, it didn't count them out for me. I still believed in them as a threat. So that takes it to another level with Kyrie's availability. He's playing some of the best basketball of his career. He's had over 100 points in his last 2 games. Kyrie is clicking right now. So having him for every game is a huge asset. But what is so fascinating to me about this team is the way they can get away with poor spacing. So we learned a lot about this over the course of the last few years with the Lakers, right? When you have guys like Dennis Schroeder or Russell Westbrook or LeBron James or Anthony Davis, basket attackers, guys that their bread and butter is putting their head down and going to the rim. Maybe Anthony Davis doesn't deserve that credit. That's another conversation. But for those other guys, they put their head down to the rim. Spacing is vitally important for those guys because spacing means driving lanes. Spacing means I just have to beat my guy off the dribble and maybe one help defender instead of driving into a thicket of bodies. But Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant are uniquely equipped to handle tight space environments because of their polish and their ability to create shots off the dribble. So for instance, if I made any slasher play basketball with Andre Drummond and Bruce Brown on the floor, they would have absolutely no luck getting to the basket. They would struggle with that throughout the game. It would be a problem for them. You know, especially like early LeBron, before he became a jump shooter, he would have really struggled with something like that. But KD and Kyrie, because they are at their most comfort beating one defender in a one-on-one situation to get to a 10 to 15 foot jump shot, they don't care how many bodies are under the basket. They'll go to the basket as a counter. They'll drive to the rim and try to finish a layup here and then as a counter to their bread and butter, which is operating in that mid-range space. A great example of this was Kobe Bryant in the late 2000s, you know, with Pau Gasol and Andrew Bynum. You know, Pau Gasol and Andrew Bynum, they clog things up in there, which is so good for the defensive end and for their offensive rebounding and their ability to control the paint. But Kobe's ability to functionally operate in that mid-range space when there was no space to operate under the basket is why he was the perfect star for that team. And it's why that team was the best team in the league over that stretch. It's a very interesting concept that I've had to feel like, because I've been concerned about that Andre Drummond, Bruce Brown fit for a while, whether or not that would become an issue. Now we'll see over time, because maybe when they get James Johnson in there, some of these other guys, let's say Seth Curry does get hurt, it'll be interesting to see if a better defensive team that's got a little bit more length and athleticism, if like a Milwaukee Bucks or a Miami Heat, if a team like that can find a way to make them pay more. But it's the ability, the luxury of keeping Bruce Brown and Andre Drummond on the floor. That's defense, guys. That's rebounding. That's physicality. That raises the physical profile of those lineups. That makes it so that KD and Kyrie don't have to carry as much of a load. I'm a big believer in what they've got going on. I don't care that they lost tonight in Memphis. I still think they're a top tier contender. Absolutely, very well could be the team holding the title. They're not my number one pick. I'm probably going to go with Phoenix still, but Brooklyn, I have them right there with Boston, like right underneath Phoenix. Really, a couple quick notes on the Grizzlies. No, they're not better without Ja Morant. We went over this last night. It's great that they keep winning these games. They're 15-2 now without Ja Morant. It's weak schedule up until tonight. Tons of size and athleticism, defense. That will manufacture wins in the regular season. But the Nets are not a great defensive team. They actually had a really bad defensive night, even though they've been pretty good defensively overall. Against a really good defensive team, a team like Boston, if you don't have a guy like Ja Morant that can break the team down off the dribble at the start of possessions, their offense is going to completely fall to pieces. So I like Memphis. They're a cool story. They need Ja Morant in order to have any chance, and I still have them like they're a level below the Bostons and the Brooklyns and the teams that have like a real chance to win the title.